Okay, and a very good afternoon to you. With me on Lyca YouTube is probably one of the most famous and important people I've had the pleasure of meeting today. Her name is Baroness Verma, and one of the big key things about her is her positions in government. And they've not only led to helping others, they've made a huge impact in society on both British Asians, ethnic people, and other cultures and diversities. An advocate of diversity and inclusion, specifically also on gender and race discrimination. Baroness Verma has not only turned the House of Lords around, but she's also looked at people's individual situations as well, tackling domestic violence against women and girls when she was a government minister, and her forthright and honest views and taking no prisoners has either got her straight to where she wanted or has got her in the press being asked many, many questions. Co-founder of a particular organization called Powerful Women. When she was senior minister's energy minister, she literally founded Powerful Women, which some people have joked and said because she needed the energy to do it because of that. But we've always said, and many people have said, that has led her onto some amazing feats. Chairing the UK National Committee of UN Women and being councillor, chancellor, and many other things of universities, including Roehampton University. I present you Baroness Verma. Good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon to you.
I hope that summed you up a little bit. Okay, look, let me start by asking you very straightforwardly, a typical day of a baroness. Everybody has been asking me, what is a typical day of a baroness? I mean, briefly, how does it start and end, really?
So it starts because, now that I'm a backbencher, when you're a government minister, of course, you can only do government things. But now I'm a backbencher, I start off because we have our businesses in Africa. So the time difference means it's an early start. And then I do a lot of work in America. So it finishes rather late. And in between, I do all my parliamentary work and I do all the stuff that you've just spoken about. So you do cram in quite a lot in each day, but it is about remaining connected with the people. And particularly where my interests, of course, lie is gender and inclusion and diversity. So I attend an awful lot of meetings just on areas like that, which do interest me. And what I've learned in recent months is my interest around digital inclusion is part of gender, diversity and inclusion as well.
Interesting point, because a person of your position, being a baroness and carrying out a lot of work, comes without a lot of power and a lot of responsibility. I'm sure you agree. To a large extent, you also become influential when you carry power and when you hold responsibility. Would you say your role towards others and vice versa is more geared towards responsibility, or is it more geared towards power?
So that's a really, really interesting question. And the reason why it's interesting is because both are entwined. And if you can look at the piece that you get by being engaged with people, it automatically gives you power. But then the wider power, the bit I think you're talking about, is how do you utilize the power that you gain?
Yeah.
And that to me is because I see the privilege of being in the House of Lords. And it's an honor to serve the people, but it's also a huge responsibility. And what I don't want to do is waste any time being given such an opportunity to be able to influence people, change things, help change things, and also encourage other people to be able to see what they can do for themselves. So power in its entity is whatever that means to you. But in the wider sense, of course, it is powerful to be in a position where you can change things.
So is it more of a responsibility role, you'd say, you carry, or more of a powerful role?
I think both. I think
they're intertwined.
They're totally intertwined, and I actually think that people who just utilize one or the other cannot achieve both, and that really is the difficulty here. For me, I use my powerful position, which is to be able to then utilize the responsibility I have in having the privilege of being in the place that I'm in.
So looking at the Asian community, you were one of the first baronesses of Asian descent in the House of Lords, and to also hold a big position, shall we say, a ministerial position in the British government. How did it make you feel then, and now looking back, Did it really live up to your expectations? Because we all like things, and when we get them, we then sometimes realise that it wasn't all it's cracked up to be, or it was better than what it was. How does it make you feel?
Well, first of all, I mean, I was the first woman of South Asian origin to ever sit on the front benches in Parliament in its history. And to me, that 21st century was a right long journey for anyone to have done that. So that just shows you how far politics has moved forward now, given if you look at the political parties and their makeup. How did it look when I got there? I think it allowed me to believe that there are certain things you can change and influence, and there are certain things you cannot do because you are under the purview of the collective responsibility under the Prime Minister of the day. So as somebody who is a disruptor and somebody who likes to go and shake the tree, I found some of the constraints quite difficult. I've always been my own boss, so having to constantly check in and to see what I can and cannot do, to be quite frank, was quite difficult.
Mm.
But at the same time, the ability to be able to do some of the things that I've managed to do, like you spoke of powerful women, that's the energy sector needed shaking up. There was no real senior women in the energy sector. So to me, that was just not acceptable. So setting powerful women up with Laura Sandy as my co-founder allowed me to do that because I was a minister at the time. Had I not been a minister at the time, maybe that would have been harder to do. So I think you've got to see the ebbs and the flows on these things, but you can, and I firmly believe this, you can actually make a lot of difference if you put your mind to it.
Just going back to one point you just mentioned, and that was it was a very big challenge for you to sometimes have to start maybe justifying what you were writing or justifying what you were saying. When you say justifying in that sense, are you talking about what you can say legally or what the Prime Minister at the day would not like, or just yourself thinking, no, I don't want to write this? What was the problem?
No, I'm of the view that once you are a part of government, then you have a responsibility to be part of the narrative that is shaped around the Prime Minister's vision of the day.
Yeah.
And therefore, even if you may or may not agree with some of the things that are being agreed on, it is your duty to be able to deliver them. And I think people need to understand that in politics, even though sometimes, MPs do get a lot of flack. Why didn't you stand up for this? Why didn't you stand up for that? But if you're a member of the government, you have to do what the collective narrative is. Otherwise, we'd end up constantly having the sort of chaos we did see in recent days, which was unedifying, wasn't helpful to the British people. We've just coming through COVID. We've just seen what's happening with the Ukraine war and its impact on economies across the world. So, we need to be able to have a little bit of discipline that, those decisions being made Prime Minister level and cabinet level are there for us all to coalesce around.
I quite agree. So what you're saying is, in effect, justification is also part of the idea
Yeah.
of can I say this or can I not? Because why not really check ourselves
Yeah.
as well as others?
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. You've always had a strong or been a strong sort of champion, an advocate for diversity and inclusion. If I was to ask you, and I will actually, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you personally? And since with your direct links and your work within diversity and inclusion, how much of a difference do you think it has made in British society? So let's start with diversity and inclusion. What does it mean to you?
Well, see, for me, it's really important that every single child born in this country today, regardless of what gender, what colour, what social economic background they are from, should feel that they can be included in anything that is existing in the country of the day. The social mobility for me is a really big ask because it cuts across all of those things. Now, when I was growing up, of course, the workplace was very different. So you had lots of different elements of how you could socially mobile upwards. Today, we're much more dependent on, the high knowledge jobs, technology jobs, which is why I referred to digital inclusion. And so it's about not feeling that you cannot be included in something rather than you feel you're excluded from something. So it's about those pathways and how does government, how do business, how do schools, how do universities ensure that regardless of your gender, your social economic background, the color of your skin, the faith that you come from, that you can feel as comfortable sitting in any setting, regardless of all of those things. And I think that's still an area that we've not quite got right in this country.
2 points there. What is digital inclusion, first of all?
So digital inclusion, I mean, look, we all know that we've got to be tech savvy.
Yes.
We all know we've got to have some basic knowledge of coding, of being able to use the internet, of being able to, access social media. So there's a lot of things that are going on, and there's even more stuff coming on. I mean, it changes day to day. But if we don't have every single part of our young population particularly, but I think our older population too, being involved and included, then that means we're excluding them. And that's not an acceptable position for us to be in. If we are a first world country, one of the richest nations on the planet, then that's how each and every one person in this country should be feeling.
Very good point there. I like that idea of digital inclusion. I just want to go back again to another point that you mentioned, which obviously when I did Let's Talk, many people, when I did diversity and inclusion, should we say shows, I was always given the appointment that, look, some people feel, and there's a lot of it still going on, that because somebody may be suffering from a disability, or maybe they need to be gender equal or gender neutral, and they get these positions, they don't necessarily qualify for those positions. They don't really have that experience, but because it looks good and it ticks boxes, we're in a situation where certain people in particular jobs are there because of the color of their skin, the color or the problem of their disability, or the fact that it looks good on the company's books. How do we balance both getting diversity and inclusion in the best way, yet also not just because he or she has got a disability, they should have the right qualifications for the job as well?
And I think that's a fabulous question. I mean, that is really one of those questions that every single organisation should be asking themselves, because I'm not a person who likes the quota system, and it's for all of those reasons. Is because I want to make sure that everybody feels that they can get there because they are the right person for the job or the right person for the position. However, and here's where the big ask is, how do we make sure that organizations, regardless of size, regardless of what institution, organization, body they are, actually are looking at it with a complete fair lens? And it's that fair lens that I don't think happens still. So to compensate, what we then do is say, as long as we tick that box, we'll have that person in. Yeah. But then where's the progress? Having one person or two people in doesn't mean you've made progress. Because the other thing technology allows us to do is actually have people, if we talk about disability for as an example, allows you to actually shape how the workplace is much more differently now. COVID enabled us to do some working from home, so there's lots of ways that organizations have got to start adapting for the 21st century. We talk a lot about well-being. We talk a lot about all of these mental health and all of these issues which are important. But given in the round, if we think that we've got to focus on one bit of it and not the other bit of it, then no progress is made. So let's challenge ourselves as well when we're asking. So when we go for job interviews, do we also ask, what's the environment like? How does it cater for progression? I know you're keen to get the job, but how do we know what the career progression is in that organisation? How do they make it easier for you to have a work-life sort of balanced lifestyle? What do they do to help you if you've got children, men and women? I mean, it shouldn't just be, childcare needs to be taken care of because you're a woman applying for the job.
Right.
And how do we make it much more?
But again, I'm going to press you on this a little bit. How do we? Look, let's put it this way. There's a gentleman out there or a lady with a particular disability or may have come from an ethnic background. They apply for the job, but some people say because of, I'm using your words here, the quota's ticked, we're going to put him or her in there. But really and truly, there are people more experienced and more probably better suited for that role, but because of that quota thing, we are up against a problem. Do I bring him in so that my company looks good and I've fitted the criteria, or do I bring the person who should be in, but they're not disabled and they're not from an ethnic minority? How do we strike that balance?
But we strike it by making sure that the way we bring people in is fair. And, and like I said to you before, I'm really not keen on quotas, but having people who look like you helps the organisation anyway. And if you look at all the companies that have really worked hard on gender inclusion, in inclusion of all the other protecteds, right? What you find, those companies actually do fare better. They do make better profits. They have a better understanding of what the end user needs. So I don't think that there is going to be a disadvantage. However, what I do want to know is, how are we, all of us, going to shape the future of the workplace, or the place where we go for leisure activities, or where we go to, just generally in life. We've got to ourselves be much more open to how to include people rather than exclude people. And I don't know. I often bang on about urban planning. I keep seeing urban planning being recreated in the 20th century lens. And yet, urban planning for the 21st century is less about industrialized cities. It should be much more about the green spaces being there with intergenerational living, with shopping and cafe culture, all being able to be accessible to everybody.
Very good point there. Okay, moving on. I mean, you're known on a personal level and a professional level to be very forthright and honest in your work and the way you speak. Sometimes even never shying away from tough situations where your opinion may be a bit tough and people have to be spoken to. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but has that ever played against you, especially from the Asian community?
So you'll have to ask the people who have probably not taken so kindly to honest, open discussion. For me, honest, open discussion means that there are no grey areas. I'm not giving you any mixed messages. And if there is something that needs to be said, then it's better said. Now, I don't mean to offend anybody. I certainly won't go out of my way to make sure that, you feel uncomfortable. But I also feel that there are times and situations where, things can be uncomfortable and people want to see change, but they're waiting for somebody else to head that change. And, if you are in a position to have the honest discussion, then why would you feel uncomfortable having somebody being honest about it?
Some people could therefore say that politics is all about talking in a flowery way and maybe even not answering certain questions. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that's the perception of a lot of political opinions that are given. Do you feel that by being forthright and honest, you've broken that mold and said, look, I'm just going to tell it like it is, like it, or, for want of a better phrase, lump it?
Yeah, I think politics has become too scripted. I think people are sort of programmed to believe that they've got to behave in a particular way, and you've lost the characters in politics. There used to be, if I go back to even my own childhood days, you might not have agreed with them, but you certainly had characters in politics who allowed you to understand an alternative view. You may not agree with the alternative view, but it gave you a place to debate the alternative view.
Yes.
And if we narrow down those spaces, then, to be quite frank, we are in a place where we won't have an honest discussion about anything.
Very good point there. You're looking now, obviously, being a speaker, shall we say, an advocate for violence against women and particularly girls and children. It is possible and very easy to, not easy, I'd say more acceptable, shall we say, for a lot of people of non-Asian descent to talk to their parents about the violence they're experiencing and stuff. But a lot of Asian girls and women tend to be brought up to say, well, look, don't talk about this outside because our honor and the way we get looked at will be bad. So please leave it. And as a result of that, the violence keeps continuing. You're of a person who's saying championing this and trying to get people out of their homes, especially women who are perhaps being inflicted violence against unfairly. But that's probably one of the hardest things you can do. How do you manage to actually get people to really speak up, especially women who are probably frightened about what their families would say?
And and just to your point, the problem is violence against women is as hard in a non-Asian or a non-ethnic background as it is in the ethnic minority communities.
Yeah.
It is incredibly difficult. I've when I was David Cameron's global champion for tackling this, I went around the world and I saw the settings. It didn't matter which social group you belonged to. If you were at the suffering end of domestic abuse or sexual abuse or coercive behavior or financial abuse, it really didn't matter which background you came from. The difficulty is that it's difficult for anyone to speak about it, but when you have a language barrier, when you have no access to outside information, again, when you don't know how to use the internet or a mobile phone, or you're not allowed to watch anything other than what is told for you to watch in your home settings. If it's minority community don't often watch the wider public messaging around what's available on help. So I think it's a challenge. It's a real big challenge. I was at an event last week on training for people who are coming into training to support women of domestic abuse. And it's really about trying to find as many safe places for people to be able to go to and be able to say that somebody's going to be at the other end helping us. And that's why, as chair of UN Women UK, our main strategic program for the last 2 years has been safe places. Every organisation should know what is it that they do in case somebody needs to have a safe space. And that doesn't mean to stay.
No.
That means to come and speak out so that we can try and help that person and access support.
Is there, or has it been acknowledged that mental violence, and by that I mean perhaps a person in one's family is constantly pumping negative thoughts into a lady's head and putting them into a state of depression, if you like, has that been acknowledged as violence against women as much as, say, physical?
So in recent days, in recent times, coercive behaviour, which is exactly this, belittling people, making them feel worthless, making them feel useless, making them feel that they cannot take decisions for themselves, has also become very much part of the abuse, under the umbrella of abuse. And and nobody should fear speaking out about it. I know it's the hardest thing and trust me, and there are men as well who suffer this, by the way. But it takes years before they actually have the courage to break, because often it's very drip, drip, slow, slow, slow. So by the time you have totally sort of given up,
Yeah.
time has it, and people will say, how on earth did you stay for so long? But you don't know how to break out of something when you're in it every single day and the facade outside is everything's okay. So and that's why I'm so determined on the program that I'm doing as chair, with the UN Women, is to try and get everybody to realise that it might just be a nursery group, or it might just be the local high street store or the supermarket. Everybody should have a place where you can go and say, look, I need some help.
How do you feel, and we'll move on in a second, I just want to, as chair of the UN Women Committee, how do you feel Britain, even Europe now, has progressed in terms of taking violence against women more seriously. Now, just before you answer that, I mean, I've been reading, for example, on the underground, there's these new adverts coming up where if you see someone looking at somebody strangely, say something, or if you can distract their attention, it's an excellent idea because it gives everybody a chance to get involved in it. But how far do you feel we as a society, both the Asian community, both the European community, and Britain as a country, has gone forth to stop this violence and this mental exhaustion that women face daily, being not only put down, but then some people would say used for a man's advantage?
So, like I said, this is a really good question with lots of questions in it. What we've got to ask ourselves is we've got the law, and the law is there, and it's very clear. But then we've got to implement it. And are the organisations, the institutions who've got to implement it, doing that? And then the perpetrators, are they actually being brought to book? And when they are being brought to book, what's the support mechanism here for the victim or the survivors? And if we can't do a journey through, then it becomes very difficult for people to take that first step, knowing, well, hang on, the law is there, but it may or may not be implemented. And at the end of it, having suffered for all of these years, the perpetrator, may get off scot-free.
Yes.
And those are the questions that, for me, are key. Why is it that we still expect the woman, usually, to leave her home, often with children? Why is that an expectation? Why is it, if there is an order out for the perpetrators not to come anywhere near, that they still manage to do it? Maybe not directly, but through family. And this is where the Asian community has got to actually take a stronger stand. Because, you can manipulate whatever you want as a circumstance if you directly aren't doing it, but your relatives are. Or your friends are. So we have to make sure that whatever we do, however we organise things, that we put the people who have suffered the most at the heart of that system.
So I'm going to press a little bit more. What would you say to a police officer who says, I'm sorry, or the Crown Prosecution Service who say, well, I've had to drop the case against Mrs. Singh or Miss Kaur or whoever because of a lack of evidence. And you say to that person, well, Mrs. Kaur or Mrs. Singh or whoever it is, look, if you don't come forth, I can't bring the evidence to the police and then we can't take this person to court. Is this not a sort of catch-22 situation? And as chairman of UN Women, how can we perhaps bypass this situation so that it isn't all about evidence and it isn't all about concrete evidence? It's about, hang on, this lady is in danger, get her out of the situation.
Yes, but I mean, the law is bound by evidence, so there is no going around that. However, there are circumstances, there are evidence by witnesses who have seen Mrs. X or Mrs. Y enduring this for a very, very long time. I mean, I remember, it was a long, long time ago when I helped a woman through a court process because of the fact her husband had tried to murder her. And it was very, very difficult for her. I mean, she had 2 children who were then totally turned against her because she had stepped out of the family household. And for her, it was the biggest step to see her husband taken to court. It was incredibly challenging. It was incredibly threatening because you had the community on one side. It was a very well-respected human being that was being accused. And then you had this lady who, but for a lot of reasons, had kept silent for a very, very long time, being told she was a liar, that it was all made up, and that actually what she wanted to do was get out of the marriage because she wanted a different life. Now, it took a long time for her to be convinced, first of all, to go through the process. But when she got to the other end, what she then did was back away from it because she actually felt it had so much toll on her mental health. Now, do we as a society put in enough places? So I go back to my point. Whether it's a religious institution or whether it's a leisure or whether it's our services, public services, they have all got to have an education towards this.
Right.
How do we give support? It may well be that we don't understand every single nook and cranny of a culture, but abuse is abuse, whichever culture it's in. And that means that we're letting ourselves down by not ensuring that the training, and this is why the event I went to last week was so important, because it showed you different aspects of how to identify somebody's abuse.
Very good point there. Thank you.
Mm.
Moving on. Look, at some of the government positions that you've held, from being Parliamentary Under Secretary of State through to being spokesman at the Cabinet Office for International Development, these are very high positions, very coming again, like we said earlier, with responsibility and power. But what is it like holding these kinds of positions for those people who want to do that? And how stressful is it when you have to sort of divide your work and life balance and also keep working because the Prime Minister says something else or the other? How is it? How do you manage to work-life balance all this?
So it's incredibly long hours. Being a minister is a very heavy duty job, but you take it on the basis that you know you will make a difference. I am one of those people. I soak information in. Luckily, I have a brain that can suck information in. But I also know that the officials that work with you are there to provide you with as much information as you require for your role. And as a team, you work together. So going in the mornings and seeing your table stacked high with papers to read, I am not a great fan of 50 pages for something that can be condensed to 4. So I create my own systems. And in creating my own systems, my officials then work with my systems. I think it's because I've managed businesses before I came into politics that I understand how to manage my day well. But look, you wouldn't go into it if you didn't enjoy it. And at the end of it, of course it's hard and it's tough and it's, it can be challenging at times. But when you see some of the things that you've managed to achieve through it, I think it makes it really worthwhile. And what we do impacts on every single person in the country. So the more people, I always say to people, stop screaming at the television or from the sidelines. If you are really, really concerned about something, get involved. And it can be at several levels, but get involved. Change only comes when good people get involved.
Very good point there. Thank you. Now, obviously, being a radio station as well, we also love to ask, and I always like to ask this: what is your favourite song that you would love us to play, either on Lyca Gold or Lyca Radio, and why?
Well, I'm a great fan of qawwalis, ghazals, Sufi music. I love that genre, and I don't know why, because having grown up here all my life, I wasn't exposed to that much. I used to be taken to a cinema when the Indian films would come, but this is a genre I just love. I think I love the meanings in the lyrics. So Sartaj, Gurdas Man, Rahat Fateh Ali Khan.
Wow.
These are amongst my sort of favoured singers. But I'm also open to some of the Bollywood stuff. I don't get a great chance to listen to lots and lots of music, but when I do, I think it's just actually, you know what? I think Indian music has really reached every single generation, which is brilliant. In growing up here, I see so many young people, really involved. And I think that's because of stations like yourself that are accessible, that give people an opportunity to listen to new and old. Because when I was growing up, there was one radio station, I think, and it was like half an hour a week. So you didn't get much exposure to it.
Yes.
So it was the Bollywood films that you went to see with your parents on a Sunday afternoon as a matinee show thing that happened in the
I
local
can
cinema.
completely relate to this.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes.
But
Okay.
no, but
All right. So
that's the
that's
music.
good.
Yeah.
Well, what can I say, Baroness Verma? Thank you very much for coming on to Lyca YouTube, should I say, and explaining not only the work that you do as a baroness and how important it is, but I think more importantly than that, thank you for explaining the role of how Britain is changing in terms of women, violence, what it will accept. And I think more importantly than that, explaining here that, look, the Asian lady, the Asian family doesn't have to live in silence. There are people like you, there are organizations that you chair, like the UN Women's Committee, that can speak up and help those people. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Hi, thank you for watching me on the YouTube channel. As you know, my name is Deep Rajah, and if you want to hear some exciting music and great times ahead, tune in to Gold Drive on Lyca Gold from 4 p.m. weekdays. We'll have music, fun, and the all-important question. See you there.